everyone, Garry Adelman, American Battlefield Trust here on one of my favorite battlefields. We are at Antietam, and it is a crisp, cool, peak color change day to talk some history. So let's start at the beginning of the Civil War. I think you know war erupts at Fort Sumter. The war is going to heat up east and west. In the east, you're going to have an action around Manassas, Battle of Bull Run, Battle of First Manassas. But not a whole lot's going to happen in the east for a little while, Ball's Bluff and whatnot. But then you've got George McClellan floating his massive army over to the peninsula. That results in the Peninsula Campaign. Of course, you've got Yorktown and Williamsburg and Fair Oaks, Seven Pines. Of course, then that puts out Joseph E. Johnston out of the action for a time. Robert E. Lee takes command. That results in the 7 Days battles. Lee decides to move northward, Cedar Mountain, Second Manassas, and Chantilly, and that brings on this place, Antietam. We are right on the outskirts of Sharpsburg. We are overlooking the scene of what we call the final attack. In order to get here, this battle sort of flows north to south a little bit. You're familiar with what happens in the morning at the cornfield, along the Hagerstown Pike, at the epicenter, and all these places to the north, in the West Woods, where Robert E. Lee's army just averts disaster and is able to push back against Union forces. Then the fight starts to move over toward the Sunken Road or the Bloody Lane, where the Union captures the Bloody Lane, and another potential disaster for the Confederates. But the mortal wounding of a general and brave Confederate counterattacks stem the tide. For that moment, the Confederate emergency is over. But throughout the morning, the Union Army has been trying to capture Burnside Bridge. That's what we call it now, because I think you know who is in command down there. And that's in the hollows behind me over there. At 10 a.m., at noon, and at 1 p.m., the Union is launching attacks to try to capture it. The third time is the charm when the 51st Pennsylvania and the 51st New York charge against Burnside Bridge. And they are able to capture it in part because of the emergencies on the other end of the line made this side of the line weak, and the Confederates didn't have a lot going on here. So when the Union captures that bridge and take about 90 minutes to move the substantial 9th Corps, 9,000 soldiers plus plenty of artillery over to this side of Antietam Creek, the Confederates don't have much to oppose them here. But ultimately, Burnside's 9th Corps is going to array on the fields you see here in a nearly mile-long or wide line, okay? And they're going to be moving in this huge line like this, okay? They're going to advance toward Confederate positions here, okay? Broadly speaking, it goes pretty well. Some of the guys on the left, they're not quite as experienced. Some guys from Connecticut lag back a little bit as Fairchild's men from Michigan, men from New York, men from Connecticut seem to push the farthest, okay? Cemetery Hill over there, the powerful Confederate position over there, crowned with cannons, falls to Wilcox's men fighting in that direction. Southerners are running through the streets of Sharpsburg, okay, abandoning the position as you've got Southerners trying to do anything to stem the tide of this massive onslaught, 8,000 Union soldiers moving sort of at once against maybe 1,200, 1,800 Confederates. They're scrambling more in the meantime, but they just don't have enough. What they do have is upwards of 20 cannons, 12 of which Robert E. Lee himself sent over here just to deal with this emergency on the Confederate right, okay? Just as the Union Army, namely the 9th New York, the 8th Connecticut, could see the spires of Sharpsburg and see the Confederates fleeing through town, Robert E. Lee is on the scene trying to rally his men at this point. A shot rings out from a cannon that proves to be from South Carolina artillery that is the vanguard of the one missing reinforcement that Robert E. Lee had, A.P. Hill's Light Division, and the roughly 3,500 soldiers under Hill who have been marching for 17 miles to get here from Harper's Ferry after paroling Union prisoners captured there a few days earlier. That has announced his arrival, and that's going to change the whole game. We are going to pick up over at the scene of A.P. Hill's arrival. Okay, so now we've moved about a half mile away or so. We were over there. We drove on this tour road you might be able to see behind me, which makes a turn and then comes up this way. And I'm standing on one of the two properties we have the opportunity to preserve. And what a great moment that we can shoot it from this beautiful deck here and see Red Hill and some of South Mountains, part of the Appalachians, as well as the scene of A.P. Hill's attack here. So After hearing the signal gun, the Union Army continued to push on, but started looking to their left. Scott Hartwig, in his I Dread the Thought of the Place, does a good job describing the Confederate arrival. I think people think that A.P. Hill's men cross at Bottler's Ford and just show up at a convenient road that's not far behind the camera there, and they're suddenly all here at once. No. There's an artillery battery that gets here ahead of the rest of the troops, pushing their horses so hard that there's only 2 artillerymen with them when they arrive. They're the ones who fire that signal gun there, okay? Then behind them we have South Carolinians under Maxcy Gregg. The order gets a little tough to figure out here, but Hartwig does a good job of piecing it together. So here comes Maxcy Gregg, particularly experienced troops for the Army of Northern Virginia, and they start to move down in this direction, relieving some of the men, the Georgians and the Virginians that had been fighting tirelessly as the Union began their advance here. And these South Carolinians start slamming into troops, and who do they slam into? The 16th Connecticut. They were mustered in 3 weeks before this moment. This is their first battle, and although there's some other experienced troops not far away, they're doing their best as they fight in Sherrick's 40-acre cornfield, which is just beyond those trees in the distance there. It also happens to be especially rugged terrain. Trust me, hike the National Park Service trails there if you get a chance, and you'll see what I'm talking about there, okay? Connecticut men with Rhode Islanders put up a pretty stiff fight, okay, but they're already starting to break as you have more Confederates coming online. Here comes Lawrence O'Brien Branch's North Carolinians. Here comes Archer's men. Here comes others, and now they are, instead of the Confederates getting flanked by a superior force, now some of the most experienced Confederates in the entire Army, A.P. Hill's Light Division, begins to arrive and flank the flankers, flanking these Union troops. And it undoes the whole thing. You have the Union left flank starting to collapse. Fairchild's men over closer to Cemetery Hill see what's going on and very reluctantly begin to pull back and slow down, okay? The Confederates show up with even more troops. There's more cannons here. It is the right place at the right time, and it is hard to write it better than that Hill arrived at the right moment. You have, remember, Confederates, luckily, forming a counterattack in the Westwoods. Then Confederates, firing a shot that mortally wounds Israel Richardson, putting him out of the fight and dashing the hopes of the Union at the Sunken Road. And then this happens again here. As to what could have happened, people speculate all the time, okay? Now, the Confederates establish a strong line up here. The Union falls back to near Burnside Bridge. They face each other the next day, neither side ready to make an advance, and then the Confederates leave, okay? But Abraham Lincoln is the real winner. He will use this as enough of a victory to issue his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. So these are really high stakes here. Is the Confederate Army captured or destroyed? Or is it enough of a victory to try to change the meaning of the war? That's what Lincoln does in the wake of this victory here for the Union Army, at least he considered it that. And look where we are now, right along the tour road, right where everybody who visits Antietam learns a little bit more about the final attack, and we hope with preserving these properties that they can learn even more and see and imagine the South Carolina, North Carolina, and other troops coming into this position here, and understand that the final attack is one of the most terrible moments for both sides at Antietam. 3,800 casualties, that's more than 4 times the number suffered at Burnside Bridge itself. So this is some of the last battlefield to be preserved, and these are some of the last 2 key pieces right along the Harper's Ferry Road that we really need to make meaningful interpretation. Thanks for watching and learning about all this history. Please share this with your friends so as many people can engage with this history as possible. We appreciate your attention and especially your generosity and all you've given us for battlefield preservation and education.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. Get inspired at battlefields.org.